I just gave your mother my kidney, I whispered from my hospital bed, my voice raspy from the heavy anesthesia. My husband of 5 years dropped a thick stack of divorce papers directly onto my fresh surgical wound and told me I was only useful for what was inside my body. His mother laughed cruelly from her wheelchair in the corner of the room. His new mistress flaunted a massive diamond ring right in my face. Then the transplant surgeon walked into the room and delivered a single sentence that made all the color drain from their greedy faces. If you have ever been bled dry by people who call themselves family, take a seat and listen. Let me know where you are watching from in the comments below, and hit subscribe if you believe karma always collects its debts. Because I am about to tell you how I brought an elite Atlanta family to their knees and took back every single thing they stole from me. My name is Kiara. I am 32 years old and the founder of a highly profitable cybersecurity firm. But to my husband Marcus and his old money family, I was just a girl from South Atlanta who got incredibly lucky to marry into their world. The sterile smell of the recovery room was the very first thing that hit me as I swam up from the darkness. The rhythmic beeping of the heart monitor felt like a heavy hammer against my skull. I had just woken up from a grueling hours-long surgery to remove my kidney to save Vivian, the terrifying matriarch of the Carter family. I blinked rapidly, fighting the thick fog of the pain medications. Marcus was standing at the foot of my bed. He was not looking at me with the relief or gratitude you would expect from a man whose wife just saved his mother's life. His custom-tailored suit was immaculate, his jaw set in a hard, unforgiving line. His eyes were completely void of any warmth. I reached out weakly, expecting him to take my hand and tell me I did a good job. Instead, he stepped forward and tossed a heavy stack of legal documents onto my lap. The thick paper landed right against my fresh incision, sending a sharp, blinding jolt of agony straight through my abdomen. "Sign them," he said, his voice completely empty of emotion. I stared at the papers, my blurred vision trying to make sense of the bold black letters spelling out dissolution of marriage. "Marcus, what is this?" I managed to ask, my throat burning with every syllable. "It is exactly what it looks like, Kiara," he said, crossing his arms over his chest. "I need you out of my house and out of my life by the end of the week. You served your purpose. Now I need to make room for someone who actually belongs in my world." Before I could even process the absolute cruelty of his words, the hospital room door swung open. Maya, Marcus's older sister, walked in, pushing Vivian in a hospital wheelchair. Right behind them was Brad, Maya's husband. Brad was a ruthless corporate lawyer, a white man who loved to constantly remind everyone how much smarter he thought he was than the rest of us. He leaned against the doorframe, flipping an expensive gold pen between his fingers, looking like he had just won the lottery. "Do not bother reading the fine print," Kiara, Brad said, with a sickeningly smug grin. "That prenuptial agreement you signed 5 years ago is completely airtight. I made sure of it myself. You waived your right to alimony to the Buckhead estate to his investment portfolios. You walk away with exactly what you brought into this family, which is absolutely nothing. You do not get a single dime of the Carter fortune." Maya chimed in, crossing her arms over her chest. "We let you stay in the penthouse because we needed you healthy for the operation," she sneered. "But now that the transaction is complete, you are trespassing. Be grateful we are not charging you for the hospital bed. Marcus has been more than generous putting up with your lack of sophistication for this long." Vivienne adjusted her expensive silk scarf, looking at me with the exact same disdain she had shown me since the very first day Marcus brought me home. She had just received a life-saving transplant, but her toxic nature remained perfectly intact. "Do not look so shocked, girl," Vivienne said, her voice dripping with venom. "You never fit in with us. A degree from a historically black college does not put you on the same level as my son's Yale pedigree. You were always just a charity case from the wrong side of the tracks trying to play dress-up at our country club. Consider that kidney your back rent for pretending to be part of Atlanta's elite for the past 5 years. We are finally done with you." The door opened one more time and Jasmine walked in. She was 26, a former Instagram model, who had been liking Marcus's photos and leaving heart emojis for the last year. She walked right up to my husband, wrapped her arms around his waist, and rested her chin on his shoulder. She raised her left hand deliberately, making sure the harsh hospital lights caught the massive diamond ring sparkling on her finger. "It is a beautiful ring, do not you think?" Jasmine purred, looking down at me on the hospital bed like I was roadkill. "Marcus has such exquisite taste. He bought it last week while you were busy doing your preoperative blood work." They all stood there watching me. They expected me to cry. They expected me to beg for my marriage, to plead for them to reconsider after the massive sacrifice I had just made. I thought about the grueling months of preparation leading up to this day. The strict diets, the endless blood draws, the painful injections. I had endured it all while Marcus claimed he was working late at the office. Now I knew he was spending those nights with Jasmine plotting my exit strategy while I was busy saving his mother's life. They had calculated this with cold precision, waiting until I was physically incapacitated and legally vulnerable to strike. For 5 years I had swallowed my pride, kept my mouth shut, and endured their endless passive-aggressive remarks just to keep the peace. I had let them treat my tech company like a cute little hobby while they paraded their real estate money around town. I had twisted myself into knots, trying to be the perfect wife and the perfect daughter-in-law. But lying there with a fresh surgical wound, a cheating husband, and a family of vultures surrounding my bed, something inside me completely snapped. The naive girl who used to desperately seek their approval died on that operating table. I did not shed a single tear. I slowly picked up the pen Brad had tossed onto the blanket. My hand was remarkably steady as I signed my name on the dotted line sealing the end of my marriage. I handed the papers back to Marcus. "Congratulations," I said, my voice quiet but perfectly clear. "You are free." Marcus snatched the papers, looking slightly unnerved by my calm demeanor. He had wanted a fight. He wanted to feel superior. He puffed out his chest, preparing to deliver another crushing insult when Dr. Sterling, the head transplant surgeon, walked into the room. He held a medical chart and looked highly uncomfortable. He glanced at the crowd of gloating people, then looked directly at Marcus. "Mr. Carter," the doctor said, clearing his throat loudly. "There seems to be a significant misunderstanding going on here." Marcus frowned, gripping the divorce papers. "What are you talking about, doctor?" "We are just finishing up some private family business before we take my mother to her private recovery suite." Dr. Sterling adjusted his glasses and looked down at his chart, taking a deep breath. "Well, that is the thing. Your mother is doing fine in her recovery suite, but your wife here did not donate her kidney to your mother." The room went dead silent. You could hear a pin drop. Jasmine dropped her hand from Marcus's waist. Vivian gripped the armrests of her wheelchair, her knuckles turning white. "What the hell do you mean?" Brad demanded, stepping forward, his aggressive lawyer persona instantly kicking in. "We scheduled this surgery for a direct donation. We signed the paperwork." Dr. Sterling shook his head firmly. "No, you did not. Kiara is not a blood match for Vivian. Due to high antibody levels, a direct transplant was biologically impossible and would have resulted in immediate organ rejection. Your wife participated in a paired donation exchange program. We removed her kidney this morning, but it was flown to New York to save a completely different patient." Vivian gasped loudly, clutching her chest as if she had been shot. "Then whose kidney is inside my body?" she shrieked, her voice echoing in the small room. "Whose organ did I get?" Dr. Sterling looked at them with a mixture of professional confusion and deep pity. "A donor from the National Registry matched with you because your wife donated hers to the pool. But technically speaking, your wife's kidney is currently inside a 55-year-old man in Manhattan." I leaned back against my hospital pillows, ignoring the searing pain in my side, and smiled for the first time all day. The absolute panic in their eyes was exquisite. They had just thrown away the one person holding their entire fragile universe together, and they had done it while mocking the very sacrifice that saved their matriarch's life. They thought they had outsmarted a simple girl from South Atlanta. They had no idea they had just declared war on a woman who controlled the very systems their wealth relied on. Dr. Sterling stood his ground as the entire Carter family erupted into absolute chaos. He explained the concept of a paired kidney exchange with the calm, detached tone of a professional used to delivering complicated news. My blood type and antibodies were a lethal combination for Vivian. If he had proceeded with a direct transplant, her body would have rejected my kidney before they even closed the incision. So I was entered into the National Registry pool. My kidney saved an anonymous billionaire in New York, and in exchange, a perfectly matched donor from that same pool saved Vivian. She got her life-saving organ, but it just did not come from the girl from South Atlanta. Marcus's face twisted into a mask of pure rage. He stepped toward the doctor, pointing an accusing finger. "You had no right," he shouted, his voice bouncing off the sterile hospital walls. "We had an agreement. She is my wife. Her organs belong to this family. She cannot just give her kidney to some random stranger in Manhattan without my explicit permission." Brad practically shoved Marcus aside, his lawyer instincts kicking into high gear. "This is gross medical malpractice," Brad snarled, getting right in Dr. Sterling's face. "You performed a bait and switch. I will have your medical license revoked by Friday. I will sue this hospital for every piece of equipment in this building. You extracted an organ under false pretenses." I watched them unravel from my hospital bed, the pain in my side momentarily dulled by the sheer absurdity of their entitlement. They were actually furious that my specific kidney was not inside Vivian's body, even though she had received a perfectly healthy organ from someone else. It was never just about saving her life. It was about owning me. It was about taking a literal piece of me as a final display of their power and dominance over my existence. Vivian gasped dramatically from her wheelchair, clutching her chest as if the new kidney inside her was suddenly tainted. "You planned this, you deceitful little rat!" she screeched, glaring at me with unbridled hatred. "You knew you were not a match, and you orchestrated this entire circus just to humiliate us. You wanted to play the martyr while giving your trashy kidney to someone else." Jasmine shrank back against the wall, suddenly realizing that marrying into the Carter family meant stepping into a hornet's nest of crazy. Maya began aggressively typing on her phone, probably drafting an emergency public relations statement for their country club friends to spin the narrative before the truth leaked out. They were shouting over each other now, a cacophony of threats, insults, and legal jargon. My heart monitor began to beep faster, registering the rising tension in the room. I looked at the fresh surgical dressing on my abdomen. I had subjected my body to a major operation to save the woman who was currently screaming insults at me. I had given up an organ just to buy my way into a family that viewed me as spare parts. I did not yell back. I did not try to explain the medical protocols or defend my intentions. I simply reached over to the side of my bed and firmly pressed the bright red nurse call button. Within seconds, the intercom crackled to life. "Yes, Mrs. Carter, do you need assistance?" a gentle voice asked over the speaker. I looked directly into Marcus's eyes. My voice was perfectly calm, steady and cold as ice. "Yes, I need hospital security in room 412 immediately," I said clearly into the speaker. "There are 5 unauthorized individuals in my room. They are screaming, making threats against the medical staff, and severely endangering my post-operative recovery. I want them removed from the premises right now." Marcus's jaw dropped. "You cannot kick us out, Kiara. I am your husband." I pointed to the signed divorce papers he was still clutching in his hand. "Not anymore, Marcus." Dr. Sterling nodded in agreement, stepping toward the door. "As her attending physician, I am ordering you all to leave now." Less than a minute later, 3 broad-shouldered security guards stepped into the room. The transition from arrogant billionaires to trespassing nuisances was instantaneous and glorious to watch. Brad tried to throw around his law firm's name, but the largest guard simply placed a heavy hand on his shoulder and pointed toward the hallway. Maya hastily grabbed the handles of Vivian's wheelchair, spinning her around as the matriarch continued to hurl insults over her shoulder. Jasmine practically sprinted out the door, eager to escape the embarrassment. Marcus lingered for one final second. He looked at me, his eyes narrowing with a toxic mixture of hatred and wounded pride. "You are going to regret this, Kiara," he spat out. "You are going away with absolutely nothing. You are going back to the gutter where you belong." Then the security guard stepped between us, forcing him out and pulling the heavy wooden door shut. The sudden silence in the room was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard. Dr. Sterling let out a long breath and gave me an apologetic look, but I just smiled at him and thanked him for his excellent work. I had lost a kidney and a husband, but for the first time in 5 years, I could finally breathe. The next 3 days in the hospital were a master class in solitary healing. Nobody from the Carter family called. Nobody sent flowers. I arranged for my own discharge, refusing to rely on anyone but myself. I spent hours staring at the ceiling, plotting my next moves. The physical pain was intense, requiring me to walk hunched over, but my mind had never been sharper. I walked out of the hospital lobby, relying heavily on a cane, the bright Atlanta sun hitting my face. Every step sent a sharp pull through my abdomen, but I kept my back straight and my head high. I was walking away from the toxicity and stepping into my freedom. I reached the curb and waited for my private car service to arrive. I pulled my phone from my purse, intending to check my emails and start figuring out my temporary living situation. The divorce papers Marcus forced me to sign stipulated that I had to vacate our Buckhead penthouse immediately. I was prepared for that. I had my own savings, my own checking accounts, and my cybersecurity firm, which they always dismissed as a silly little hobby. But as the screen of my phone lit up, a string of frantic notifications appeared. They were not emails or messages from friends. They were automated fraud alerts from my primary banking institution. I tapped the screen, my brow furrowing in confusion. The first notification was a withdrawal warning from my personal checking account. The second was a critical alert from my high-limit platinum credit card. I opened the banking app and my breath caught in my throat. A charge of exactly $150,000 had just been processed at the Cartier boutique in Buckhead. I stood frozen on the hospital sidewalk, staring at the glaring red numbers on my screen. $150,000. That was not joint money. That was the specific credit card tied directly to my personal business accounts. The accounts I had built from the ground up long before I ever met Marcus Carter. I quickly scrolled through the transaction history. There were more. $50,000 transferred to an offshore holding company. $25,000 charged at a luxury car dealership. My available balances were plummeting by the second, draining down to zero in real time right before my eyes. The realization hit me with the force of a freight train. Brad, the brilliant, ruthless corporate lawyer. He had drafted that ironclad prenuptial agreement, but he had also handled the integration of our finances when Marcus and I first got married. He had slipped a proxy clause into the endless stack of paperwork I signed years ago, giving Marcus legal authorization to access my personal assets in the event of a medical emergency or physical incapacitation. I had been incapacitated for the last 4 days recovering from surgery. They knew the moment those divorce papers were formally filed with the court, a mandatory asset freeze would take effect. Neither of us would be able to touch large sums of money until a judge reviewed the case. They were not just kicking me out of the marriage. They were executing a coordinated financial attack to completely bankrupt me before I could even make it to a safe house. That massive Cartier charge was not just a random shopping spree. Marcus was buying Jasmine's ridiculously expensive diamond engagement ring using the money I earned writing code and building firewalls. He was literally proposing to his mistress using my hard-earned cash. A sleek black town car pulled up to the curb, interrupting my spiraling thoughts. The driver stepped out, opening the back door for me. I looked at the dark-tinted windows of the car, then down at my phone. My bank account balance now read a pathetic $342. They had taken everything. They thought stripping me of my money and throwing me out onto the street with a fresh surgical wound would break me. They thought I would collapse and come crawling back begging for a meager settlement. I carefully lowered myself into the back seat of the car, wincing as the seatbelt pressed against my side. I did not call the bank to cry or complain. I did not call Marcus to scream. I calmly pulled my laptop from my tote bag and opened it, resting it gently on my lap. They forgot one crucial detail. I was not just a wife. I was the very person who designed the encryption software for Marcus's entire private equity firm. They wanted to play dirty with my money. I was about to show them what happens when you steal from the woman who holds the master keys to your entire digital kingdom. The harsh ping of my phone screen glaring with that $150,000 Cartier charge faded into the background as my Uber pulled up to the wrought iron gates of the Buckhead estate. I paid the driver with the last $30 available in my secondary checking account and stepped out into the stifling Atlanta heat. Every movement pulled at the fresh surgical staples in my abdomen, but I refused to hunch over. I walked up the sweeping driveway to the massive oak front doors of the mansion I had spent 5 years turning into a home. I slid my key into the brass lock, but it would not turn. I tried again, jiggling the metal, but the entire mechanism had been replaced. Before I could even pull my hand away, the heavy door swung open. Brad stood there looking down at me from the threshold. He wore a crisp designer polo shirt and a sickeningly smug expression, holding a cheap black plastic garbage bag in his right hand. With a flick of his wrist, he tossed the bag down the stone steps. It landed violently at my feet, bursting open to spill a few faded t-shirts and a pair of worn-out sneakers onto the concrete. "You really thought you could just walk back in here, Kiara?" Brad asked, leaning casually against the doorframe. "Marcus filed the separation paperwork an hour ago, and since you clearly did not read the fine print of that prenuptial agreement I drafted, let me educate you. This property is entirely owned by Vivian Carter's irrevocable trust. Your name is nowhere on the deed. You are officially trespassing." He looked down at the spilled clothes and let out a sharp, patronizing laugh. "I packed up the garbage you brought into this marriage. Consider it a parting gift. Welcome back to the South Atlanta slums, Kiara. I am sure you will feel right at home." I looked down at the pathetic pile of fabric. They wanted me to scream. They wanted me to pound my fists against the heavy oak door and beg for access to my own life. They thought I was completely broken, standing there with a fresh surgical wound and a drained bank account. I did not scream. I did not shed a single tear. The world seemed to spin around me, a suffocating heat pressing in from all sides, but my mind was absolute ice. I slowly lowered myself onto the cold stone steps, carefully protecting my healing side. I reached into my leather tote bag and pulled out my laptop, resting it firmly on my knees. Brad scoffed, crossing his arms over his chest. "What exactly are you doing?" "Updating your resume. Nobody is going to hire a mid-level IT girl who just got publicly dumped by Marcus Carter. Your little tech hobby is over." That was their fatal flaw. They were so blinded by their old money arrogance that they never bothered to understand exactly what I did for a living. To them, I was just a basic computer technician who fixed router issues and installed software. They had absolutely no idea that I was a top-tier cybersecurity architect. They forgot that I was the one who hand-coded the entire digital infrastructure for Marcus's private equity fund. I had built the servers. I had written the firewalls. I had even designed and installed the smart home security system for the very house Brad was currently standing in. I opened my laptop and bypassed the standard login screens. My fingers flew across the keyboard, ignoring the throbbing pain in my side. I started with the house. I accessed the smart home mainframe and immediately revoked all biometric and passcode access for Marcus, Brad, Maya, and Vivian. I triggered the exterior security shutters to drop, effectively sealing Brad outside on the porch with me. He jumped as the heavy metal blinds slammed down over the massive front windows, cutting off his access to the interior. "What the hell did you just do?" Brad demanded, his smug demeanor faltering as he grabbed the front door handle, realizing it had magnetically locked shut behind him. I did not answer him. I was already diving straight into the administrative back-end of Carter Capital Partners. I did not just change Marcus's passwords. I initiated a complete cryptographic lockdown on their central trading servers. In less than 45 seconds, I encrypted every single transaction record, client portfolio, and offshore wire transfer tied to his firm. I deployed a military-grade ransomware protocol that I had designed myself. I effectively turned a $1 billion private equity portfolio into a useless brick of digital white noise. Brad was pounding on the heavy oak door, threatening to call the police when his cell phone began to vibrate violently in his pocket. He pulled it out, glancing at the screen with a deep frown. He answered it, putting it on speakerphone out of pure habit. "What is it, Marcus? I am busy taking out the trash," Brad snapped. Marcus's voice blasted through the speaker, high-pitched and absolutely frantic. "Brad, the servers are down. Everything is gone. I just got off the phone with Vanguard Holdings. They pulled out. Our biggest client just canceled their entire contract because their transaction data is completely encrypted and inaccessible. We are locked out of our own system. We are losing millions by the second." Brad's arrogant smile instantly vanished, the color draining entirely from his face. He stared at me, his eyes wide with sudden, terrifying comprehension. I closed my laptop with a sharp, definitive snap. I slowly stood up, picking up the black garbage bag containing my cheap clothes. I looked Brad dead in the eye and offered him a chilling smile. "You said the law belongs to those with money, Brad," I said, my voice echoing clearly across the manicured lawn. "But the monetary system belongs to me." I turned my back on the Buckhead mansion and walked down the long driveway without a single backward glance, the sound of Marcus screaming through the phone fading into the distance. I hailed a cheap rideshare at the bottom of the hill and directed the driver to a run-down motel right off the interstate. The room smelled of stale smoke and harsh industrial bleach, a stark contrast to the lavender-infused air of the Buckhead mansion I had just locked my former family out of. I carefully lowered myself onto the sagging mattress. My surgical incision burned with a fierce, relentless heat. The doctors had prescribed strict bed rest and heavy painkillers, but my mind was operating on pure adrenaline. I had no time to recover. I had to get my money back. I flipped open my laptop on the wobbly laminate desk. The glow of the screen illuminated the dark room, casting green reflections of scrolling code across my face. Marcus and Brad thought they had completely neutralized me by freezing my personal accounts. They thought my encryption of their central trading servers was just a petty act of vandalism from a scorned wife. They failed to realize that the ransomware I deployed was merely a smokescreen. While their entire IT department was currently panicking over the locked servers, trying desperately to salvage their trading portfolios, I was quietly slipping through a hidden backdoor I had coded into their financial architecture 3 years ago. I bypassed Brad's secondary firewalls in less than 4 minutes. He was a ruthless corporate lawyer, but his understanding of network security was laughably arrogant. I navigated straight to the shadow ledgers, tracing the digital footprints of the offshore wire transfers and that sickening $150,000 charge at Cartier. I wanted to see exactly how Brad had structured the theft. As I dug deeper into the hidden accounting files, a pattern began to emerge that made the blood run cold in my veins. This was not a simple case of a cheating husband draining a joint account to buy jewelry for his mistress. This was a highly sophisticated embezzlement ring. I pulled up the routing numbers for the shell company that had processed the Cartier payment. The funds had not just come from my drained savings. My money had been used as a bridge to cover a massive withdrawal from another account. I traced the primary source of the capital, and the truth hit me so hard I forgot about the pain in my abdomen. The money had been siphoned directly from the Vivian Carter Youth Foundation. My stomach churned with absolute disgust. Vivian hosted lavish charity galas every single winter, wearing custom couture and parading around as a savior of the community. Her foundation was supposedly dedicated to funding educational programs and providing technology grants for underprivileged Black children in South Atlanta. Those were kids from my exact neighborhood. Kids walking the same cracked sidewalks I walked growing up. Kids sitting in the same underfunded classrooms I had fought so hard to escape. Vivian had spent the last 5 years looking down her nose at me, mocking my background, and treating my degree from a historically Black college like it was a joke. All the while, her precious son and her brilliant son-in-law were actively stealing millions of dollars from the very children she claimed to champion. They were systematically bleeding the charity drive, funneling donations through a labyrinth of phantom corporations to fund their luxury cars, their offshore investments, and their mistresses. Jasmine was currently walking around Atlanta flaunting a massive diamond ring paid for by stolen community grants. My fingers flew across the keyboard, fueled by a furious, blinding rage. I was not just going to take my money back. I was going to drain every single shell account they had created and wire the stolen millions directly back to the schools in South Atlanta. I initiated a forced transfer protocol preparing to redirect the funds. But as I accessed the corporate registry for their primary offshore shell company, a glaring anomaly flashed across my screen. The system required a biometric verification tied to the primary guarantor of the corporate debt. I pulled the registration documents to see which of Marcus's holding companies was listed as the parent entity. The name on the screen made my heart stop. It was my name, Kiara Carter. I rapidly opened the attached PDF files, my eyes scanning the dense legal jargon. Millions of dollars in high-interest corporate loans had been taken out over the past 3 years under this specific shell company. The debt was staggering. And right at the bottom of the guarantor agreement was my digital signature. Brad had not just found a loophole in the prenuptial agreement to drain my checking accounts. He had weaponized the financial integration paperwork I signed on our wedding day. He had deliberately structured the entire embezzlement operation so that I was the sole legal owner of the Phantom Corporation. Marcus and Brad had been stealing the charity funds, but they had routed every single stolen dollar and every fraudulent loan through an entity bearing my name. The realization washed over me like ice water. They knew the audit of Vivian's charity was eventually going to happen. They knew the federal investigators would eventually follow the missing millions. They had set me up from the very beginning. I was never just a trophy wife from the wrong side of the tracks to them. I was their ultimate insurance policy. I was the perfect fall guy. When the authorities finally uncovered the massive fraud ring, all the digital paper trails and legal documents would point directly to the angry, disgruntled wife who owned a cybersecurity firm. They were going to frame me for stealing from my own community. If this shell company collapsed, I would not just lose my business. I would face decades in federal prison for grand larceny and wire fraud. I stared at the glowing screen, my mind racing through possible countermeasures. I needed to download the original access logs. I needed to prove that the IP addresses initiating the fraudulent transfers originated from Brad's private office network and Marcus's devices. I started running a data extraction script, desperately trying to pull the hidden server histories before Brad realized I was inside the system. The progress bar on my screen hit 40%. I held my breath watching the encrypted files slowly transfer to my local drive. 50%. 60%. Suddenly, the dark motel room was flooded with strobing red and blue lights. The harsh glare sliced through the gaps in the cheap plastic blinds, painting the walls in erratic, chaotic patterns. The crunch of heavy tires skidding to a halt on the gravel parking lot outside echoed through the thin walls. My heart hammered against my ribs. I looked at the progress bar. 75%. I just needed one more minute. Heavy boots pounded against the concrete walkway outside my door. The doorknob rattled violently, followed by a series of deafening, concussive knocks that made the cheap wooden frame shudder. Atlanta Police Department, a deep, aggressive voice shouted from the other side of the door. Open up immediately. I stared at my laptop screen. 88%. If I closed the computer now, the extraction would fail and I would have absolutely zero proof of Brad and Marcus's framing operation. If I did not open the door, the police were going to ram it off its hinges. Brad had moved faster than I ever anticipated, using his elite connections to bypass standard legal procedures and send the authorities straight to my location. He told me the law belonged to those with money, and he was currently proving it. The pounding intensified, shaking the entire wall. Open the door right now or we are coming in. I hit the enter key, sending the extracted server logs to an encrypted offshore cloud drive, just a fraction of a second, before the flimsy motel door splintered inward. 3 officers swarmed the small room, their weapons drawn, and flashlights blinding me as they shouted conflicting commands. I raised my hands, slowly wincing as the sudden movement pulled violently at my surgical staples. They did not care that I was a woman recovering from a major organ removal. They slammed me against the cheap laminate desk, pulling my arms behind my back and snapping cold steel handcuffs around my wrists. The arresting officer read me my rights, citing grand larceny, corporate sabotage, and federal wire fraud. Brad had moved with terrifying speed, using his elite political connections to bypass standard legal procedures and send a strike team directly to my location. The next 18 hours in the Fulton County holding cell were a masterclass in physical and psychological torture. I sat on a freezing concrete bench, shivering in the thin clothes Brad had thrown at me. I had absolutely zero access to my post-operative pain medication, but the burning rage pulsing through my veins kept me from passing out. My appointed public defender informed me that Brad had pushed the district attorney for no bail, painting me as a highly dangerous cyber terrorist and a severe flight risk who had just crippled a major financial institution. But because I had no prior criminal record, the judge granted bail anyway. It took the very last emergency reserve I had hidden in a decentralized crypto wallet to buy my temporary freedom. When I walked out of the precinct into the blinding afternoon sun, my net worth was essentially zero. The police had confiscated my laptop, my tote bag, and my primary phone as evidence. All I had left was the cheap burner phone I managed to buy at a gas station down the street using the spare change in my pocket. I stood on the sidewalk, nursing my throbbing side, and checked the time. It was Thursday afternoon. I knew exactly where the entire Carter family was right at this very moment. It was the day of Vivian's annual spring charity tea. I hailed an Uber and directed the driver to the edge of the exclusive Buckhead Country Club. I did not walk through the main entrance with its towering columns and valet attendants. Instead, I slipped around the back, navigating through the labyrinth of service corridors and kitchen hallways. I knew this layout intimately. 2 years ago, my firm had been contracted to upgrade the club's entire audiovisual and security network. I had mapped these halls myself. I stood in the shadows just behind the heavy oak service doors leading into the grand ballroom, waiting for the right moment. Inside, the sheer opulence was nauseating. Crystal chandeliers gleamed over dozens of round tables draped in pink silk and adorned with imported orchids. Atlanta's wealthiest socialites sat sipping vintage champagne and nibbling on delicate pastries. At the front podium stood Vivian, looking like a picture of maternal grace in a pastel Chanel suit. Marcus and Brad stood dutifully behind her, flanking the matriarch, like loyal guards playing the roles of the perfect supportive family members to absolute perfection. "This has been an incredibly difficult week for our family," Vivian was saying into the microphone, her voice dripping with manufactured sorrow as she dabbed at her dry eyes with a lace handkerchief. "We opened our hearts and our home to Kiara. We treated her like our own flesh and blood. We gave her everything. But unfortunately, severe mental illness and pure greed are a tragic combination. She attempted to extort my son and completely defraud this beautiful charity. Thankfully, the authorities intervened in time, and she is currently facing the severe legal consequences of her delusions." A collective murmur of sympathetic outrage rippled through the crowd of wealthy women. They were drinking her lies like expensive tea, completely blind to the monster standing at the podium. Vivian smiled bravely, basking in their adoration and pity. I pulled the cheap burner phone from my pocket. I did not need to walk up to the microphone to be heard. Because I had designed the club's wireless network, I still knew the backdoor administrative login for their master Bluetooth sound system. I connected my device to the mainframe. I then logged into my encrypted cloud drive and downloaded the specific audio file I had extracted from Brad's private server logs just before the police kicked in my door. It was an unencrypted recording of a private phone call between Brad and Marcus from 3 weeks ago. I synced the file to the ballroom's master audio channel, cranked the equalizer volume to its absolute maximum limit, and pressed play. Vivian's microphone abruptly cut out with a sharp, ear-piercing screech of feedback that made several women shriek and cover their ears. Before Vivian could tap the microphone to test it, Marcus's voice boomed from the massive surround sound speakers hidden in the vaulted ceiling. "I need another $100,000 transferred to the shell company by Friday." Brad Marcus's recorded voice echoed through the ballroom, crystal clear and dripping with staggering arrogance. "Jasmine wants the 4-carat emerald cut, and the diamond dealer will not hold it over the weekend." The entire ballroom fell dead silent. Teacups paused halfway to lips. People stared at the ceiling in absolute confusion. Marcus's jaw dropped open, his face instantly draining of all color. "Are you completely out of your mind?" Brad's recorded voice fired back through the speakers, echoing with aggressive annoyance. "We just pulled $250,000 from Vivian's Youth Foundation yesterday to cover the down payment on your new Porsche. The accountants are getting suspicious of the cash flow. You need to wait." "So let them be suspicious." Marcus laughed on the recording, a cruel, callous sound that reverberated off the crystal chandeliers. "It is a charity for poor black kids in South Atlanta. Nobody actually cares if the money reaches them, as long as my mother throws a good party and hands out a few cheap laptops for the press. Just bury the withdrawal and put the debt under Kiara's name like we planned. If the federal investigators ever come sniffing around, they will arrest my clueless wife." Gasps of absolute horror erupted from the tables. Several prominent donors dropped their silver forks in sheer disgust. Women were whispering frantically, pointing at the stage. Vivian's face turned the color of ash, her hands trembling so violently she dropped her lace handkerchief. Marcus looked like he was going to vomit right there on the stage. I pushed open the heavy service doors and walked right into the middle of the grand ballroom. I did not look like one of them. I was pale, wearing the same cheap wrinkled clothes Brad had thrown at me, my posture slightly hunched from the agonizing pain of my healing surgical wound. But the absolute fire burning in my eyes made the crowd of wealthy socialites part from me like the Red Sea. I stared directly at the stage, watching their perfectly curated world completely shatter. Brad's shock only lasted for a fraction of a second. His ruthless legal survival instincts kicked in immediately. He lunged forward, shoving Vivian aside to grab the podium microphone while signaling frantically to the club's security guards stationed at the main doors. "Do not listen to this absolute garbage," Brad shouted over the rising panic in the room, pointing a shaking finger directly at me as I stood in the center aisle. "She is a convicted cyber terrorist. That audio is a complete fake. It is an AI-generated deepfake designed by a deranged, vindictive woman trying to extort this family. Security, get her out of here now." Two burly security guards rushed forward from the perimeter, grabbing my arms roughly and twisting them behind my back. The sudden, violent motion ripped a fresh scream of agony from my throat as my surgical incision stretched dangerously tight. White-hot pain flared across my vision, but I locked my knees and refused to drop to the floor. I kept my eyes fixed entirely on Brad. Brad stepped down from the stage, walking right up to my face as the guards restrained me tightly. The wealthy women around us were completely silent, watching the spectacle in shock. Brad leaned in close, his perfectly white teeth bared in a malicious, victorious sneer. He lowered his voice so only I could hear the pure venom laced in his words. "Nice try, sweetheart," Brad whispered, his breath hot against my ear. "But that audio file is completely inadmissible in any court of law without the original server metadata verifying its origin. And since the police seized your laptop this morning, you do not have the original evidence, you bitch." The security guards shoved me through the service exit of the country club before I could even respond to Brad's taunt. Within 10 minutes, the flashing lights of police cruisers illuminated the perfectly manicured driveway. For the second time in 24 hours, I found myself shoved into the back of a squad car. The charges had miraculously escalated from simple trespassing to criminal defamation, corporate espionage, and terroristic threats. Brad had clearly made a few frantic phone calls to his golfing buddies in the district attorney's office. The interrogation room at the downtown precinct was exactly as bleak as you would imagine. The walls were painted a sickly shade of institutional gray, and the air conditioning blasted at a freezing temperature designed to break a suspect's resolve. I sat in a hard metal chair, my hands cuffed to the steel ring bolted to the center of the table. My surgical wound burned with a dull, agonizing throb, but I kept my breathing slow and measured. I did not ask for water. I did not ask for a lawyer. I just sat there staring at the cheap analog clock on the wall. 2 hours and 14 minutes passed. The heavy metal door finally clicked open. It was not a police detective who walked into the room. It was Brad. He had swapped his country club polo for a sharply tailored charcoal suit, looking every bit the high-powered attorney, ready to crush a defenseless opponent. Right behind him walked Maya, carrying a pristine designer handbag and a look of manufactured pity that made my stomach turn. Brad tossed a thick stack of legal documents onto the metal table. The papers landed with a heavy thud, sliding right up to my cuffed hands. "I am going to make this very simple for you, Kiara," Brad said, pulling out a chair and sitting directly across from me. He folded his hands, resting them on the table with supreme arrogance. "You are currently facing 10 years in a federal penitentiary. You hacked into a private financial institution. You deployed ransomware. And you crashed a private charity event to play a deep-fake audio file generated by artificial intelligence in a desperate attempt to defame my family. The district attorney is ready to throw the book at you." I glanced down at the documents, then back up at him. "And what exactly are these?" I asked, my voice perfectly steady. Maya stepped forward, placing a perfectly manicured hand on Brad's shoulder. She looked down at me as if I were a stray dog that had tracked mud onto her imported rugs. "It is a confession, Kiara," she said, her voice dripping with toxic sweetness. "We know you are not well. The surgery, the divorce, losing the lifestyle you were so desperate to cling to, it clearly triggered a psychotic break. We are not monsters. We actually want to help you." Brad tapped the top of the pages with a heavy gold pen. "Sign a full confession admitting that you fabricated the audio recording using AI software because you were a bitter, jealous ex-wife. Surrender all equity in your tech company to Marcus as compensation for the financial damages you caused today. In exchange, I will personally speak to the district attorney. We will drop the federal espionage charges. You plead guilty to a minor misdemeanor. We will even pay for your stay in a private psychiatric facility. You avoid prison, and we get our lives back. Everybody wins." I stared at them, marveling at their absolute delusion. They were so accustomed to buying their way out of consequences that they actually believed a printed piece of paper could erase digital reality. They thought because the local police held my laptop, they had completely neutralized my threat. They did not understand that a top-tier cybersecurity architect never keeps the master keys on a physical hard drive. The metadata verifying the authenticity of their embezzlement conversation was currently bouncing across 3 decentralized servers in Switzerland. "You really think I am going to sign a confession confirming a lie?" I said, leaning back in the uncomfortable metal chair. Brad slammed his hand flat against the table, the sharp crack echoing in the small room. "You do not have a choice," he snarled, his polished facade finally cracking. "I own this city, Kiara. I play golf with the judges. I fund the political campaigns of the people who run this precinct. Your laptop is currently sitting in an evidence locker downstairs waiting to be wiped clean by a technician who owes me a favor. You have no proof. You have no money. You have absolutely no one coming to save you. Sign the damn paper, or I swear I will make sure you rot in a cell for the next decade." Maya shook her head in dramatic disappointment. "Just sign it, Kiara. You never belonged in our world anyway. You were always just a charity case. Take the deal before Brad changes his mind." I slowly shifted my gaze away from them, looking past Brad's shoulder to the analog clock on the wall. The second hand ticked forward. It was exactly 3 o'clock in the afternoon. "I am not signing anything," I said, holding my cuffed hands perfectly still. "In fact, I think we are completely done here." Brad let out a harsh, humorless laugh. "You are delusional. You are not going anywhere." At that exact second, the heavy metal door to the interrogation room swung open so violently it slammed against the concrete block wall. Brad jumped to his feet, turning around to reprimand whoever had dared to interrupt his intimidation tactic. The chief of police strode into the room. He was a large, imposing man, but right now his face was flushed a pale, sickly shade of white, and sweat beaded on his forehead. He did not look at Brad. He did not look at Maya. He marched straight to the table, pulled a small key from his belt, and immediately unlocked the handcuffs binding my wrist to the steel ring. "What the hell are you doing?" Brad demanded, his voice rising in panicked outrage. "She is a federal suspect. I am in the middle of securing a confession. You cannot just unchain her." The chief of police swallowed hard, stepping back from the table. "Mr. Carter," the chief said, his voice tight with undeniable anxiety. "You need to step away from the suspect immediately. You have no authorization to be in this room." "I have every authorization," Brad shouted, pulling out his phone. "I am calling the district attorney right now. You are going to lose your badge for this." Before Brad could even dial a number, a tall man in a flawlessly tailored black bespoke suit stepped through the doorway. He moved with the kind of quiet, lethal confidence that made the air in the room suddenly feel incredibly thin. Right behind him walked three other attorneys, all dressed in identical dark suits, carrying thick leather briefcases. They moved like a coordinated strike team, flooding the small interrogation space and forcing Brad and Maya to step back against the wall. The lead attorney approached the table. He did not spare a single glance for Brad or Maya. He looked directly at me and offered a respectful bow of his head. "Ms. Carter," he said, his voice smooth and commanding. "My name is Harrison Vance, senior partner at Vance & Sterling. I apologize for the delay. Traffic from the airport was dreadful." I rubbed my wrists where the metal cuffs had dug into my skin and offered him a small smile. "You are right on time, Mr. Vance." Brad stared at the lawyers, his mouth opening and closing like a suffocated fish. He recognized that name. Anyone who operated in high-level corporate law recognized the firm Vance & Sterling. They were not local Atlanta lawyers. They were a ruthless elite firm based out of Washington, D.C., known for dismantling massive corporate fraud syndicates. They cost thousands of dollars an hour and they never lost a case. "What is going on here?" Maya whispered, her voice trembling as she clutched Brad's arm. Harrison Vance turned to face Brad, slowly adjusting his expensive silk tie. He unlatched his leather briefcase and pulled out a single sheet of paper, placing it deliberately on the metal table right on top of Brad's unsigned confession document. "What is going on?" "Mr. Carter, is that my client is leaving this precinct immediately," Vance said, his tone sharp enough to cut glass. "Her bail has been posted in full. All local charges of trespassing and defamation have been formally challenged and are currently pending dismissal due to gross prosecutorial misconduct." Brad's face turned a dangerous shade of crimson. "She does not have the money for bail. Her accounts are frozen." Vance offered a smile devoid of any warmth. "Our firm has posted a $5 million surety bond on Ms. Carter's behalf. You see, we consider it a minor investment given the magnitude of her portfolio. And while we are on the subject of legal actions, I am officially serving you notice." Vance tapped the paper he had placed on the table. "My client is not just walking out of here today. We are filing a massive federal countersuit against you, Marcus Carter, and the Vivian Carter Youth Foundation for grand larceny, wire fraud, and the illegal misappropriation of charitable funds. We have already submitted the encrypted offshore server metadata verifying the authenticity of your audio recording directly to the FBI." Brad staggered back as if he had been physically struck, hitting the concrete wall behind him. The arrogant, untouchable lawyer was suddenly shaking. "But her laptop," he stammered, staring at me with pure terror in his eyes. "The police seized her laptop." I slowly stood up from the metal chair, smoothing out the wrinkles in my cheap clothes. I looked Brad dead in the eyes and smiled. "You really think I keep my original files on a local hard drive, Brad?" I asked, my voice echoing in the dead silence of the room. "I uploaded the unencrypted master logs to a decentralized server the moment I saw police lights at my motel. You tried to trap a cybersecurity architect in a digital cage. All you did was hand me the matches to burn your entire life to the ground. Let us go, Mr. Vance. We have a federal agency waiting for my statement." The camera dollies back, expanding the frame as I step out of the claustrophobic interrogation room into the main bullpen of the precinct. Brad chased after us, his expensive leather shoes slapping against the scuffed linoleum floor. His face was a mask of absolute desperation, masquerading as rage. He shouted at the police chief, demanding that I be restrained, that my lawyer be removed from the premises, and that the local authorities maintain control of the investigation. But his words fell on deaf ears. The usually chaotic precinct was dead silent. Dozens of police officers, detectives, and administrative staff stood frozen at their desks, staring toward the main entrance. The heavy glass double doors of the precinct had been propped open. A perimeter of broad-shouldered private security contractors stood shoulder to shoulder blocking the entrance and creating a secure corridor. Standing at the exact center of the bullpen, illuminated by the harsh fluorescent lights, was a man who commanded absolute authority without uttering a single word. He wore a bespoke navy suit that probably cost more than the average detective made in a year. His silver hair was impeccably styled, and his piercing gray eyes swept across the room with the casual dominance of an apex predator. He leaned slightly on a silver-handled cane, projecting an aura of immense, unimaginable power. This was not a local Atlanta politician or a regional corporate lawyer. This was a man whose influence moved global markets. "Who the hell are you?" Brad demanded, his voice cracking, as he finally noticed the silent crowd and the formidable presence standing between us and the exit. "This is an active police investigation. You have no jurisdiction here." The silver-haired man did not even blink at Brad's outburst. He bypassed the arrogant lawyer entirely and walked directly toward me. His sharp gaze softened into an expression of profound respect as he stopped a few feet away. "Ms. Carter," he said, his voice a rich, deep baritone that commanded the attention of every single person in the room. "I am Julian Vanguard. I believe we have some unfinished business regarding a certain decentralized cloud server." Brad froze, the color completely draining from his face. The name hit him like a physical blow. Julian Vanguard was not just a billionaire. He was the founder and CEO of Vanguard Holdings, the massive international investment conglomerate that Marcus had been desperately trying to keep as their primary client. He was the absolute pinnacle of Wall Street power, the man whose sudden withdrawal of funds had sent Carter Capital Partners into a death spiral just a few hours ago. "Mr. Vanguard." Brad stammered, his aggressive posture instantly collapsing into sickening sycophancy. "I had no idea you were in Atlanta. There has been a terrible misunderstanding. The woman you are speaking to is a cyber terrorist who just breached your financial portfolios through our servers. We are currently prosecuting her to the fullest extent of the law to protect your investments." Julian Vanguard slowly turned his head to look at Brad. The billionaire's expression was so cold it could have frozen the entire precinct. "You are a remarkably stupid man, Mr. Carter," Julian said softly. "And your profound ignorance is only eclipsed by your breathtaking arrogance. You truly believe you can orchestrate a multi-million-dollar embezzlement scheme, funnel stolen charity funds through offshore shell companies, and frame the one person who actually possesses the intellect to expose you." Brad swallowed hard, taking a step back as he bumped into Maya, who was trembling silently behind him. "I do not know what you are talking about," Brad lied, his voice barely a whisper. "She is the one who hacked the system. We have the police report. We have her physical laptop." Julian tapped his silver cane against the linoleum floor. Two men in immaculate gray suits stepped out from behind the security perimeter. They did not look like lawyers. They carried heavy titanium-locked briefcases and wore badges identifying them as elite independent forensic auditors. "Let me educate you on how real power operates, Mr. Carter," Julian said, gesturing to the men. "The encrypted data packets Ms. Carter transmitted right before your corrupt local police kicked down her motel door did not go to a random offshore drive. She routed them through a highly secure encrypted backdoor directly into the Vanguard Holdings private mainframe. My personal team of forensic accountants intercepted the files 3 hours ago. They have already decrypted the metadata verifying the original source IP addresses. We have the pristine, unaltered digital footprints proving that every single fraudulent transfer and every corporate loan taken out in Kiara's name originated from your personal office computer and your brother's private devices." Maya let out a muffled sob, gripping Brad's jacket. Brad looked wildly at the police chief, who immediately raised his hands and took 3 large steps away from the Carter family, completely abandoning his wealthy patron. "The FBI took over jurisdiction 20 minutes ago," the chief muttered, looking firmly at the floor. "It is out of my hands, Brad." "But why?" Brad choked out, pointing a shaking finger at me. "Why would you protect her, Vanguard? She is nobody. She is just a mid-level tech contractor from the slums. Why are you risking your entire firm's reputation to protect a random woman? Julian Vanguard smiled, and the sheer predatory nature of that smile made Brad flinch. Because, Mr. Carter, she is not a random woman, Julian said, his voice echoing clearly across the silent precinct. 5 months ago, my kidneys were failing. I was on dialysis and weeks away from death. My wealth could not buy me a donor because of a rare antibody complication. At that exact same time, your brother Marcus required a transplant. Kiara here did not hesitate to offer her own kidney to save her husband, but because her rare blood type was not a direct match for Marcus, she entered a federal paired kidney exchange program. Julian took a step closer to Brad, his gray eyes blazing with righteous fury. She donated her kidney into the national pool so that Marcus could receive a matching organ from a stranger. Do you know who received Kiara's kidney in that exchange, Mr. Carter? Brad shook his head, his mouth hanging open in silent horror. I did, Julian stated, resting both hands on his cane. Her sacrifice saved my life. The kidney currently keeping me alive belongs to the woman you just tried to lock in a federal prison. You targeted my donor. You attempted to destroy the life of the person who gave me back my own. I stood there feeling a sudden rush of overwhelming emotion. When the doctors told me about the paired exchange program, I never asked who received my organ. All that mattered was saving Marcus. To realize that my selfless act for a man who completely betrayed me had inadvertently forged a bond with one of the most powerful men in the world was staggering. The universe had a fascinating way of balancing the scales. Julian turned his back on Brad, dismissing him entirely. He signaled to the forensic auditors, who immediately walked over to the police chief, handing him a stack of federal warrants and officially taking custody of the evidence locker containing my seized laptop. Julian looked at me, his expression softening with profound gratitude and fierce protective loyalty. You saved my life, Kiara, Julian said, his voice carrying a quiet, absolute promise. Now how exactly do you want to crush them? I looked past the billionaire to where Brad and Maya stood. They were trembling, looking completely pathetic and stripped of all their arrogant armor. They had thought my lack of money made me powerless. They had underestimated my intellect, my resilience, and the ripple effects of my own kindness. I want to destroy their greatest pride, I said, my voice ringing with absolute certainty. I want to dismantle their careers and their money. I want every single stolen dollar pulled from their accounts and wired back to the schools in South Atlanta. And I want them to watch it happen. 3 weeks had passed since I walked out of that freezing police precinct. 3 weeks of meticulous, relentless preparation hidden away in Julian Vanguard's private fortress of an estate. The transition from a framed fugitive to a woman armed with the resources of Wall Street's most feared apex predator was staggering. Julian did not just offer me protection, he offered me absolute, unmitigated financial firepower. We sat in his study for days, analyzing the decrypted ledgers my extraction script had successfully pulled from Marcus and Brad's servers. The depth of their depravity was worse than I had originally realized. They had not just stolen from the Vivian Carter Youth Foundation, they had systematically starved community centers and youth clinics, keeping the money flowing into offshore accounts to fund their extravagant lifestyles. Tonight they were going to celebrate that wealth. Marcus and Jasmine had booked the grand ballroom at the Ritz-Carlton for their engagement party. It was the social event of the Atlanta season, a gathering of the city's most elite politicians, judges, and corporate titans. I stood in the darkened alcove just outside the main mahogany doors of the ballroom, watching the spectacle unfold through a sliver of glass. The sheer opulence was nauseating. Thousands of imported white orchids cascaded from the crystal chandeliers. Waiters in white gloves circulated with trays of vintage champagne and beluga caviar. Hundreds of guests sat at tables draped in silver silk, completely unaware that they were toasting a criminal syndicate built on the backs of underprivileged children. On the main stage, Vivian Carter adjusted her designer silk wrap and tapped a crystal flute against the microphone. The ambient chatter of the massive room immediately quieted, waiting for the matriarch to speak. She looked at Marcus and Jasmine with absolute adoration before turning her gaze to the wealthy crowd. We have weathered quite a terrifying storm recently, Vivian announced, her voice projecting a masterful tone of martyred resilience. As many of you know, my son endured a highly toxic marriage to a woman who fundamentally did not understand our values or our world. We tried to elevate her. We tried to bring her into the light. But you simply cannot force class onto someone desperate to drag you down to their level. She attempted to destroy my son, and she tried to violently defraud this beautiful charity. Vivian paused, wiping a perfectly timed fake tear from her cheek. But the justice system is swift. She is currently facing the severe legal consequences of her psychopathic delusions. Tonight, however, is about healing and new beginnings. We have finally purged the trash from our lives. Jasmine is the beautiful, sophisticated partner Marcus always deserved. To Marcus and Jasmine. The crowd raised their glasses, clapping politely. Jasmine beamed, flashing the massive 4-carat emerald-cut diamond ring paid for entirely by stolen community grants. Marcus kissed her cheek, looking utterly victorious, his chest puffed out with arrogant pride. I turned to the man standing quietly beside me in the shadows. Julian Vanguard wore a tailored midnight blue tuxedo, his presence radiating an unspoken lethal authority. He looked down at me and offered a sharp, anticipating smile. "Ready to burn their empire to the ground, Kiara?" he asked softly, his gray eyes glinting in the dim light. I smoothed the front of my emerald green evening gown. It was a custom couture piece Julian had insisted on securing for me, armor woven from heavy silk. My surgical wound was nearly healed, but the fire in my chest burned hotter than ever. "I am ready," I said. Julian signaled his security team. The heavy mahogany doors swung open with a resounding thud. I walked into the ballroom with Julian Vanguard matching my stride perfectly. The moment our shoes stepped onto the plush, imported carpets, the music seemed to falter. The ambient chatter in the room began to die, a sudden collective silence rippling through the crowd like a shockwave. Hundreds of heads turned toward the entrance. For a fleeting second, they only saw me, the disgraced ex-wife, the alleged cyber-terrorist daring to crash the engagement party of the year. I saw sneers forming on the faces of Vivian's high society friends. I saw Brad standing near the ice sculpture, his face contorting into an expression of sheer murderous rage as he immediately reached into his jacket pocket to summon security. Then they saw the man walking beside me. The realization hit the room like a physical blow. Julian Vanguard was a mythic figure in these circles. He was a billionaire titan whose mere whisper could dictate the rise and fall of entire global financial sectors. Men who commanded local political empires visibly paled and instinctively straightened their postures. Several prominent bankers and real estate developers immediately stepped forward, bowing their heads in deep deference, hoping to catch Vanguard's eye. But Julian did not acknowledge a single one of them. He remained a half-step behind my right shoulder, casting a cold warning glare at anyone who dared step too close to me. He was acting entirely as my escort, my protector, my enforcing shadow. I walked straight down the center aisle, the crowd parting frantically to make way. Vivian's triumphant smile shattered into a mask of pure terror. The color completely drained from her face, leaving her looking sickly and hollow. Marcus froze his champagne flute, halting halfway to his mouth, his eyes widening in absolute horror. Jasmine's smug expression dissolved into panicked confusion as she looked from me to the imposing billionaire shielding my flank. Brad rushed toward the stage from the bar, desperate to intercept me, but Julian subtly raised a single finger. Two of Vanguard's massive private security contractors materialized from the crowd, moving with terrifying speed. They blocked Brad's path with an immovable wall of muscle and tailored suits, forcing the ruthless lawyer to halt in his tracks. I ascended the short stairs to the stage. Jasmine instinctively shrank back, gripping Marcus's arm. I reached out and calmly pulled the microphone straight from her trembling hand. She did not even attempt to resist. "Good evening, everyone," I said, my voice echoing cleanly across the cavernous ballroom. The silence in the room was so absolute you could hear the ice melting in the champagne buckets. Vivian was just speaking about values and class. She spoke about purging the trash from her family's pristine life. I think it is only fitting that we take a closer look at exactly what funded this beautiful, opulent celebration. I pulled my phone from my silver clutch and tapped a single command. I had bypassed the hotel's audiovisual network 20 minutes ago. The massive digital screens behind the stage, normally reserved for displaying romantic slideshows of the happy couple, instantly went black. A second later, high-resolution images flashed across the brilliant LED displays. These were not the encrypted files Brad had tried to mock in the police station. These were the original authenticated bank statements extracted directly from the Vanguard Holdings private mainframe, meticulously verified by Julian's independent audit team. The screens displayed the primary accounts of the Vivian Carter Youth Foundation. The crowd watched in stunned silence as red highlighted arrows traced a direct pipeline of millions of dollars flowing out of the charity account. The graphics broke down the complex web of shell companies, showing the money funneling through the dummy corporation Brad had registered in my name and landing squarely in Marcus's private offshore accounts. I tapped my screen again. The display shifted to an itemized ledger cross-referencing dates and amounts with chilling precision. Next to a withdrawal of $150,000 from the charity fund was a direct receipt from Cartier. Next to a withdrawal of $250,000 was the title deed for Marcus's new Porsche. Next to a withdrawal of $80,000 were the invoices for Vivian's luxury spa retreats and designer wardrobes. "That beautiful diamond ring Jasmine is wearing right now," I announced, pointing directly at her trembling hand, was purchased with money meant to buy computers for underfunded schools in South Atlanta. The vintage champagne you are currently drinking was paid for by grants meant to provide hot meals for underprivileged children. This entire family has built a mountain of wealth by systematically stealing from the very community they claim to serve. And when they realized an audit was inevitable, they framed me to cover their tracks. The ballroom erupted. Outrage gasps and furious whispers filled the air. Prominent donors who had written six-figure checks to Vivian's charity stared at the screens in absolute revulsion. The mayor of Atlanta, who was seated at the front table, stood up and threw his napkin on the floor, his face dark with fury. Vivian clutched her chest, swaying unsteadily on her expensive heels, looking as though she might actually faint. "Turn it off!" Marcus screamed, his voice cracking with frantic panic as he lunged toward the audiovisual booth at the side of the stage. "Shut those screens down right now, I am ordering you." He realized the technicians were not moving. They were staring at the screens, completely disgusted by the evidence. Marcus spun back toward me, his face flushed a violent mottled red. The facade of the polished private equity manager was gone, replaced by a cornered, desperate animal. "You lying bitch!" Marcus roared, charging across the stage toward me, his fists balled at his sides. Before Julian's security could even intervene, Marcus stopped dead in his tracks. He realized he could not touch me, not with Julian Vanguard standing right there. Instead, he pivoted, turning his rage toward the hotel staff. "Security!" Marcus bellowed, spit flying from his lips as he pointed frantically at me. "Where the hell is the hotel management? I demand you get this lunatic out of here. Arrest her for trespassing. Throw her out on the street." A sharp, commanding voice cut through the chaos from the side of the stage. "That will not be happening, Mr. Carter." The general manager of the Ritz-Carlton stepped into the light. He was an older, dignified man whom Marcus had personally bullied, threatened, and demeaned during the entire planning process of this engagement party. Marcus looked at him, expecting immediate, absolute obedience. "What are you talking about?" Marcus demanded, his voice shaking with unhinged fury. "I rented this entire ballroom. I paid for this space. I demand you remove her right now." The manager did not look at Marcus. Instead, he walked directly over to me, stopping respectfully and offering a deep, formal bow. He completely ignored the furious groom to be acting as though Marcus was entirely invisible. "I sincerely apologize for the disturbance," Ms. Chiara, the manager, said, his tone entirely professional and deeply deferential. "Is there anything else you require us to adjust regarding the audiovisual display?" Marcus stared at the manager as if the man had suddenly grown a second head. "What is wrong with you?" Marcus shrieked, his voice echoing off the walls. "She is a criminal. Throw her out of my party." The manager finally turned his head to look at Marcus. An expression of deep, immense satisfaction settled over the manager's features. I cannot do that, Mr. Carter, the manager replied smoothly, adjusting his lapels. Because as of 9 o'clock this morning, Vanguard Holdings executed a complete hostile buyout of this hospitality group's parent company. The controlling shares were instantly transferred, and restructuring is already underway. The manager looked back at me, offering another respectful nod before delivering the final crushing blow. I cannot throw Ms. Chiara out of this building, Mr. Carter, because she is currently the majority shareholder of this entire hotel chain. You are standing in her ballroom. Jasmine's face contorted, the pristine mask of the blushing bride shattering into something ugly and desperate. The collective attention of the room was locked entirely on her panicked, twitching features. Instead of stepping back, she dug her heels into the stage, her survival instinct manifesting as pure, unfiltered venom. "You are completely delusional!" Jasmine shrieked, her voice echoing shrilly through the ballroom. She pointed a manicured finger at me, her chest heaving. "You are nothing but a pathologically jealous, sick woman. You have been obsessed with Marcus since the day he threw you out. You could not handle the fact that he traded up, that he finally found a woman who actually belongs in this tier of society. You are standing there spinning these psychotic lies because you cannot stand the sight of our happiness." She thrust her left hand high into the air, the massive 4-carat emerald-cut diamond catching the light of the crystal chandeliers and refracting it across the darkened stage. She wielded the ring like a weapon, a shield against the truth that was rapidly closing in on her. "He loves me!" Jasmine screamed, her voice bordering on hysterical. "He bought this for me because I am worth it. He is a billionaire, and you are just a bitter, pathetic ex-wife trying to ruin the most important night of my life because you have absolutely nothing left." I did not flinch. I did not raise my voice. I merely looked at her with a profound clinical detachment. The silence in the room stretched heavy and suffocating, waiting for my response. I raised my right hand and snapped my fingers. The heavy mahogany doors at the back of the ballroom did not just open this time, they were violently thrust wide. The collective gasp of the Atlanta elite sucked the remaining air from the room. 24 men and women wearing dark tactical gear and navy blue windbreakers with the letters FBI emblazoned in bold yellow across their backs flooded into the venue. They moved with terrifying coordinated precision, immediately securing every exit and forming a perimeter around the stage. The Grand Engagement Gala had instantly been transformed into a federal crime scene. Guests who had been sipping champagne just moments ago began scrambling backward, desperate to distance themselves from the Carter family. The politicians and judges who had posed for photos with Vivian earlier in the evening were now practically tripping over chairs to get out of the camera frames. A tall, uncompromising female special agent marched straight down the center aisle, her badge clipped to her belt and a warrant secured in her grip. She bypassed Marcus entirely and stopped directly at the edge of the stage, locking her hard, unyielding gaze onto Jasmine. "Jasmine Dupree," the special agent said, her voice cutting through the panic like a serrated blade. "The piece of jewelry you are currently wearing was purchased on October 12th at Cartier. The transaction was completed using a wire transfer directly traced to an offshore shell company funded entirely by the Vivian Carter Youth Foundation." Jasmine froze, her hand still suspended in the air, the diamond suddenly feeling like a dead weight. "That ring," the agent continued, stepping onto the stage, "was bought with stolen charity funds meant for underprivileged children. It is classified as stolen property and is now a primary piece of physical evidence in a federal grand larceny and wire fraud investigation. Take it off and hand it over immediately, or you will be arrested right here, right now, as an accessory after the fact." The blood drained completely from Jasmine's face, leaving her looking like a porcelain doll. Her wide, terrified eyes darted from the grim, unsmiling federal agent to the blinding diamond on her finger, and finally to Marcus. Marcus was sweating profusely, his hands raised in a placating gesture. "Jasmine, baby, wait. I can explain everything. It is a misunderstanding. The lawyers will handle this." The illusion shattered. In a fraction of a second, Jasmine processed the horrific reality of her situation. She was not marrying a powerful, untouchable billionaire. She was standing on a stage next to a broke, fraudulent criminal who was about to spend the next 2 decades in a federal penitentiary, and he had just implicated her by putting stolen evidence on her finger. "You lied to me!" Jasmine shrieked, her voice tearing at the seams. The carefully cultivated sophistication vanished, replaced by sheer, unfiltered panic. She clawed frantically at her left hand, desperate to separate herself from the crime. "You told me you were a billionaire. You told me you owned this city." "Jasmine, please," Marcus begged, taking a step toward her. "Do not touch me," she screamed, her voice echoing with revulsion. She finally yanked the multi-million-dollar ring over her knuckle. With a guttural cry of disgust, she hurled the diamond directly at Marcus. It bounced hard off his expensive velvet tuxedo lapel and clattered onto the hardwood stage floor, rolling to a stop near the FBI agent's boots. Without sparing Marcus another glance, Jasmine hitched up the heavy silk skirt of her custom couture gown. She shoved past a federal agent, nearly tripping over her own heels, and sprinted down the center aisle. She abandoned him right there, fleeing the ballroom in a desperate, humiliating sprint, leaving the love of her life to face the federal government completely alone. Julian Vanguard let out a low, quiet chuckle beside me, thoroughly entertained by the absolute destruction of his enemies. On the stage, Vivian Carter watched her prospective daughter-in-law flee in absolute paralyzing horror. The untouchable matriarch of Atlanta society realized in a single devastating moment that her entire empire had been incinerated. The wealth was seized, her social standing was a permanent punchline, and federal agents were physically stepping onto the stage holding handcuffs meant for her sons. Vivian let out a strangled, terrible gasp. Her perfectly manicured hands flew to her chest, clutching the fabric of her designer gown. Her eyes rolled back as she began to violently hyperventilate, her knees buckling beneath her. She collapsed against the acrylic podium, gasping for air that her panic-stricken lungs refused to take in, her body shutting down under the unimaginable weight of her public ruin. But the catastrophic fallout did not end there. Right beside his collapsing mother, Marcus let out a sudden, agonizing scream that chilled the blood of everyone in the room. He doubled over violently, clutching his right side as if he had been stabbed. He dropped to his knees, his face turning a sickening shade of gray sweat pouring down his forehead. The sheer, unadulterated terror of the FBI raid, combined with the explosive destruction of his life and the catastrophic spike in his blood pressure, had triggered a violent physiological response. His body, overwhelmed by the extreme suffocating stress, was going into acute, violent rejection of his newly transplanted kidney. He writhed on the stage floor, grasping at his abdomen in unimaginable agony, choking on his own panicked breaths, as the very organ that was supposed to save him began to shut down. The medical emergency unfolding on the stage did nothing to halt the relentless forward momentum of the federal raid. While 2 FBI agents immediately radioed for paramedics to attend to Marcus and Vivian, the rest of the tactical team fanned out across the ballroom, securing exits and confiscating electronic devices from the Carter Capital executive tables. Amidst the absolute chaos, Brad Carter realized the walls of his carefully constructed kingdom were rapidly closing in. His survival instinct kicked into overdrive. He violently shoved his way past a stunned waiter and marched toward the lead federal agent, attempting to summon the polished, imposing legal persona that had intimidated courtrooms across the state. "Stop this immediately!" Brad commanded, throwing his arms wide and physically blocking the path of 2 agents moving toward the Carter family tables. "I am the general counsel for Carter Capital Partners and the Vivian Carter Youth Foundation. Every single document, server log, and financial record you are attempting to seize falls under strict attorney-client privilege. You have no warrant for this specific venue, and any data currently being displayed on those screens is inadmissible." Brad turned his attention toward me, his face contorting into a mask of desperate venom. The camera flashes from the smartphones of the elite guests illuminated the sweat beading on his forehead. "She stole that data," Brad shouted, pointing a shaking finger directly at my face. "That is unauthorized access to a highly secured financial network. That is corporate espionage and a massive federal offense. You cannot use illegally procured data to justify a raid. She is the one you need to put in handcuffs. I am filing a multi-million-dollar civil suit against her tomorrow morning, and I will see her buried in a federal penitentiary for the rest of her miserable life." I did not flinch. I did not take a single step backward. My gaze shifted slowly between Brad's panicked, sweating face and the stoic, unyielding expressions of the federal agents. The entire ballroom held its collective breath, watching the power dynamic pivot back and forth in real time. I offered Brad a smile devoid of any warmth or mercy. "Did you skip your legal ethics seminars at Harvard, Brad?" I asked, my voice cutting through the ambient noise of the ballroom like a polished blade. Attorney-client privilege is a sacred shield meant to protect legitimate legal counsel. However, that shield completely disintegrates the exact second a lawyer uses their position to actively participate in the commission of a crime. I took a slow, measured step toward him, holding his panicked gaze. "It is called the crime-fraud exception. Brad," I stated clearly, ensuring every politician and judge in the room heard the specific legal terminology. "You did not just advise your family on corporate tax law. You personally drafted the fake vendor invoices. You personally established the offshore shell corporations in the Cayman Islands. You used your private legal accounts to launder stolen charity money directly into your own pockets. You are not their lawyer, Brad. You are their co-conspirator." Brad's jaw clamped shut. The blood drained from his face, leaving him looking like a ghost in a tailored suit. He opened his mouth to formulate a rebuttal, but I did not give him the oxygen to speak. "And regarding your accusation of illegal data theft," I continued, my tone dropping into a deadly calm register, "you seem to have forgotten a very crucial piece of our history. 5 years ago, I built the internal network architecture for Carter Capital Partners from scratch. I designed your firewalls. I wrote the encryption protocols you trusted to hide your dirty money." I tilted my head, watching the horrific realization dawn in his eyes. "Did you honestly believe a master cybersecurity architect would hand over the keys to an entire corporate empire without building a proprietary backdoor into the system?" I asked softly. "You did not lock me out of the network, Brad. I let you think you did. Every single time you logged into your secure terminal to wire stolen funds to Switzerland, I was writing your keystrokes. I saw every password, every account number, and every hidden ledger. The FBI did not need a warrant to breach your servers tonight. I simply handed them the master administrative access that I have legally owned since day one." The silence that followed my words was absolute. Brad staggered backward as if he had been physically struck. His mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. The arrogant, untouchable lawyer had been completely dismantled, stripped of his legal armor, and left standing naked in front of the federal government. Behind him, Maya had been listening to every single word. Maya's entire existence was predicated on the preservation of wealth and social status. She had married Brad for the country club memberships, the designer handbags, and the effortless prestige that came with the Carter name. Now, looking at the FBI agents pulling heavy steel handcuffs from their belts, she calculated her future with terrifying speed. She saw the freezing glare of Julian Vanguard. She saw her mother-in-law unconscious on the floor. She saw Marcus writhing in agony. And she looked at her husband, the man who was about to spend the best years of his life rotting in a federal prison cell. Maya's survival instinct eclipsed any remaining shred of matrimonial loyalty. "You arrogant, stupid bastard!" Maya shrieked, her voice piercing the heavy silence of the ballroom. Brad barely had time to turn his head before Maya's open palm struck his cheek with the force of a thunderclap. The sharp, violent crack of the slap echoed across the grand room. Brad stumbled sideways, grabbing his face in sheer shock. Maya did not stop. She stepped into his personal space, her perfectly contoured face twisted into a mask of pure, unadulterated revulsion. "You told me the money was from legitimate corporate bonuses," she screamed, jabbing her manicured finger hard into his chest. "You told me the offshore accounts were just standard tax optimization strategies. You lied to me. I had absolutely nothing to do with this. I never signed a single document." "Maya. Maya, please." Brad begged, reaching out to grab her arm. "We can fix this. Just stay calm." "Do not touch me," she yelled violently slapping his hands away. She took 3 massive steps backward, creating a distinct physical barrier between herself and the sinking ship of the Carter family. "You are going to federal prison, Brad. You are a common thief, and you tried to drag me down into the mud with you. I am filing for divorce the second the courthouse opens on Monday morning. I am taking the house, I am taking my accounts, and I am leaving you to rot. Maya spun around on her designer heels, ignoring the stunned gasps of her high society friends, and marched directly toward the exit. She did not look back once, entirely abandoning the man she had sworn to love through thick and thin. Before Brad could even process his wife's brutal public betrayal, the lead FBI agent stepped forward. He grabbed Brad's shoulder, spinning him around and slamming him hard against the nearest cocktail table. The sound of heavy steel ratcheting closed around Brad's wrists was the sweetest music I had ever heard. Bradley Carter, you are under arrest for grand larceny, conspiracy to commit wire fraud, and money laundering. The agent stated, his voice loud and authoritative. You have the right to remain silent. I highly suggest you finally use it. As the federal agents hauled a shell, shocked and handcuffed Brad toward the service elevators, a low, miserable groan drew my attention back to the center of the stage. Marcus was on his hands and knees. The emergency medical responders had just breached the ballroom doors, pushing a heavy stretcher down the center aisle. Marcus looked worse than death. His skin was a translucent, sickly yellow, and sweat dripped from his chin onto the polished hardwood floor. The intense psychological trauma of losing his bride, his fortune, his reputation, and his freedom had pushed his body past the breaking point. His immune system was aggressively attacking the kidney I had sacrificed to give him. He looked up, his sunken eyes finding me standing tall and untouched next to Julian Vanguard. The sheer arrogance that had defined Marcus Carter his entire life was completely gone. There was no pride left, no manipulative charm, and no aggressive posturing. There was only the pathetic, desperate terror of a man looking into the abyss. Marcus dragged himself forward, his hands slipping on the smooth floor. He crawled across the short distance separating us, stopping directly at my feet. He looked up at me, tears of absolute agony and despair streaming down his hollow face. Kiara? He gasped, his voice a wet, rattling wheeze. Please, please, Kiara. He reached out a trembling hand, his fingers weakly grasping the hem of my emerald gown. I am sorry, he choked out, coughing violently as a spasm of pain rocked his body. I am so sorry for everything I did to you. Please do not let them take the company. Do not let Vanguard destroy what we built. You saved my life once, Kiara. You gave me your kidney. You loved me. Please talk to Vanguard. Tell him to stop. Have mercy on me. I looked down at the man I had once vowed to spend my life with. I remembered the coldness in his eyes when he handed me those divorce papers while I was still bleeding in a hospital bed. I remembered the way he had laughed when Vivienne called me trash. I remembered the absolute lack of hesitation he showed when he tried to frame me for his own crimes. I did not feel anger anymore. I did not feel sadness. I felt nothing but a clean, cold indifference. I reached down and gently but firmly peeled his sweating fingers off the fabric of my dress. I did save your life, Marcus, I said, my voice soft but entirely merciless. I gave you a second chance, and you used that second chance to prove exactly what kind of monster you truly are. I have no mercy left to give you. I stepped back, allowing the paramedics to rush onto the stage. They hoisted his writhing body onto the stretcher, strapping him down as he continued to weep and beg for a salvation that would never come. The paramedics moved in quickly, attempting to hoist his writhing body onto the stretcher, but Marcus violently shoved them away. Get off me! He wheezed, his hands slick with cold sweat as he fought against the emergency responders. His survival instinct had bypassed logic entirely. He dragged himself forward across the polished stage, refusing to be restrained. He was a man watching his entire universe collapse, and he was desperately grasping at the very last stable object in the room. Me. He looked up from the floor, sobbing. Real ugly tears streamed down his face, ruining his perfectly manicured appearance and soaking the collar of his custom velvet tuxedo. Kiara, please, you have to listen to me. Marcus begged, his voice breaking into a pathetic whine. I was manipulated. I did not want to do any of this. Brad set up the entire offshore financial architecture. He convinced me it was the only way to keep the firm afloat during the market downturn. And Jasmine, she is a sociopath. She seduced me. She deliberately poisoned my mind against you and isolated me from reality. I was weak and I was stupid, but I never stopped loving you. You have to believe me." He reached out his trembling, sweat-soaked hands, hovering just inches from the hem of my emerald gown. He was too terrified of Julian Vanguard's silent looming presence to actually make physical contact, but his desperation was palpable. "Think about us," Kiara Marcus pleaded, pointing a shaking finger between the two of us. "Think about our first apartment in Midtown. Think about how hard we worked together before all this money complicated everything. I lost my way, but I am still the man you married. I am still the man you loved. Your sacrifice, your kidney, you went through all of that agonizing pain to save my life. You would not have done that if we did not share a true epic love. You saved me. Please save me again. Tell Vanguard to back off. Tell the FBI it was all Brad. We can start over." I stared down at him, feeling a profound glacial calm settle over my entire body. The man I had literally bled for, the man I had offered parts of my own body to save, was nothing more than a hollow, spineless coward. He was perfectly willing to throw his own brother into a federal prison and blame a runaway bride to save his own skin. He honestly believed he could weaponize our past, using the ghosts of our early 20s to overwrite the monster he had become. He thought my sacrifice was a bargaining chip. I did not raise my voice. I did not scream. I slowly unclasped the silver latch of my evening clutch. I reached inside and pulled out a thick folded stack of legal documents. The heavy parchment was stiff, the edges permanently stained with a rusted dark brown color. Dried blood. My blood. I held the documents in the air for a fraction of a second, ensuring that the silent crowd of Atlanta's elite could see exactly what I was holding before I dropped them. The papers fluttered down, landing perfectly in front of Marcus's trembling knees. He stared at them, his breath catching in his throat as he recognized the thick legal stationery of the Carter Capital law firm. "Do you love me, Marcus?" I asked, my voice dropping to a deadly whisper that carried cleanly over the absolute silence of the ballroom. "Do you remember these papers? These are the divorce documents you had Brad draft behind my back. You brought them to my hospital room less than 48 hours after I was sliced open on an operating table to save your miserable life." Marcus stared at the rusted brown stains on the paper, unable to look away. "You threw these documents onto my bed." I continued, stepping closer to him. "They landed directly on my unhealed surgical wound. I bled through my bandages and onto your legal demands while you stood over me and told me I was useless to you. You told me I did not belong in your world. You told me I was trash." I leaned down, bringing my face level with his terrified, tear-streaked eyes. "You do not love me, Marcus. You love my ability to fix your mistakes. You love my intellect when it profits you. But I am not fixing this one. You are entirely out of options." As of 1 hour ago, Vanguard Holdings officially absorbed the toxic remains of Carter Capital Partners. Your firm has been completely liquidated. The board of directors has officially stripped you of your title as chief executive officer. All of your personal assets, your offshore accounts, your luxury vehicles, and your properties have been frozen by the federal government. You are completely bankrupt. Marcus let out a low, agonizing whimper, his hands gripping his hair as he rocked back and forth on his knees. "Tomorrow morning, you will not be waking up in a penthouse," I stated, delivering the final crushing blow with absolute precision. "You will be waking up in a federal holding cell, awaiting trial for wire fraud, embezzlement, and corporate espionage. Welcome to reality, Marcus." A piercing, deafening wail suddenly shattered the heavy silence of the ballroom. A fleet of ambulances had just pulled up to the front entrance of the Ritz-Carlton. Their sirens blared with terrifying volume, and the strobing red and white emergency lights bled through the massive floor-to-ceiling windows, painting the ballroom in frantic flashes of color. On the far side of the stage, Vivian Carter, who had been slouched against the acrylic podium, violently gasping for air, suddenly let out a sharp, choked gasp. Her perfectly manicured hands flew to her throat, clutching at her pearl necklace, as her eyes rolled completely to the back of her head. She collapsed, falling flat onto the polished hardwood stage with a heavy, sickening thud. She was entirely unresponsive. The paramedics who had been trying to assess Marcus immediately abandoned him and rushed toward the matriarch of the Carter family. They ripped open their bright orange emergency medical kits, frantically checking her vitals and calling out diagnostic codes. The crowd surged forward in panicked, morbid curiosity before Julian's private security detail formed a physical barricade, forcing the wealthy guests to step back and give the medical team room to work. One of the lead medics looked up, his face pale and urgent as he examined the medical alert bracelet locked around Vivienne's wrist. "Her blood pressure is completely bottoming out," the medic shouted over the din of the blaring sirens outside. "The extreme psychological stress is triggering an acute immunological response. Her body is actively attacking her newly transplanted kidney. She is going into hyperacute organ rejection." The medic turned to his partner, his hands flying rapidly as he prepared an intravenous line. "We are losing her. We need to push a massive dose of highly potent anti-rejection immunosuppressants immediately, or her organs are going to permanently shut down before we even get her onto the stretcher. Move fast." The rhythmic strike of my designer heels against the polished linoleum floor echoed like a metronome ticking down the final seconds of the Carter dynasty. The transition from the imported carpets of the Ritz-Carlton to the stark, glaring white corridors of the Atlanta Medical Center was jarring, but I did not break my stride. I walked with my posture perfectly straight, my expression an unreadable mask of absolute calm. Just outside the heavy glass doors of the intensive care unit, I found Marcus. He was slumped against the wall, looking like a hollowed-out shell of the arrogant executive he had been just hours ago. His velvet tuxedo jacket was gone. His bow tie hung loosely around his neck, and his hands were buried in his hair. A senior attending physician stood over him, holding a titanium clipboard. The doctor's face was grim, entirely unsympathetic to the former billionaire's frantic tears. "Mr. Carter," the doctor stated firmly, "we are completely out of time and options. Your mother's body is in a state of hyperacute rejection. The extreme psychological trauma she suffered tonight caused a massive spike in cortisol and adrenaline, sending her immune system into overdrive. It is violently attacking her transplanted kidney. To stop total organ failure, we need to immediately administer a highly specialized VIP-grade synthetic protein therapy and keep her in the ultra-isolated critical care wing for at least a month." Marcus dragged his hands down his face, his chest heaving. "Do it," he pleaded. "Do whatever it takes." "The cost of the medication alone is $300,000 per month," the doctor continued, his voice flat. "Because your premium private insurance was just flagged and suspended by your corporate provider, I need a valid payment method or a verified financial guarantor right now before I can authorize the pharmacy to release the drugs." Marcus frantically pulled a heavy black titanium American Express card from his pocket and shoved it at the hospital billing administrator standing next to the doctor. "Charge it," Marcus begged, his voice cracking into a pathetic whine. "Charge whatever you need. Put $500,000 on it. Just save her." The administrator swiped the heavy metal card through a portable terminal. A harsh red light blinked instantly. Declined. Marcus let out a strangled gasp. He ripped a platinum visa from his wallet, his hands shaking so violently he nearly dropped it. Declined. He pulled out a sleek silver bank card linked directly to the Carter Capital Partners executive expense account. Declined. Julian Vanguard's financial blockade was absolute and impenetrable. Every single line of credit, every hidden offshore account, every corporate slush fund had been instantaneously frozen and seized by federal authorities and Vanguard Holdings. Marcus Carter was a billionaire on paper who could not even afford to buy a cup of coffee from the hospital vending machine. He turned his head and saw me standing there watching his absolute financial ruin with cold clinical detachment. Marcus lunged forward, falling to his knees. He grabbed the heavy clipboard from the doctor and shoved the financial guarantor form toward me. "Kiara, please." Marcus sobbed, his pride completely annihilated. "They will not give her the medication. They are going to let her organs shut down and she will die tonight. Sign the paper. Vanguard gave you control of everything. You have the money. You own the accounts. Please just sign the guarantee. I am begging you." I looked down at his trembling, outstretched hands. I did not say a word. I stepped past him, pushing open the heavy glass door of the VIP suite. The room was massive, resembling a luxury hotel suite more than a hospital room. Vivian Carter lay in the center of the plush mechanical bed, connected to a dozen beeping monitors. Her skin was a terrifying shade of ashen gray, her breathing shallow and ragged. But as I approached the foot of her bed, her eyes fluttered open. Even staring down the barrel of her own mortality, Vivian's aristocratic arrogance refused to die. She looked at my custom emerald gown and the absolute authority radiating from my presence. Her upper lip curled into a sneer of pure venomous hatred. She summoned every ounce of her remaining strength to project her disgust. "You," Vivian rasped, her voice a weak but vicious hiss. "You did this. You ruined my pristine family." She coughed violently, her frail body shaking, but she forced her glaring eyes back to mine, refusing to break contact. "Do not stand there looking at me with that pathetic fake sympathy," she spat. "You are nothing but trash. You will always be a common classless nobody. You think you have won because you have Vanguard backing you. I would rather die right here on this bed than take a single cent of your filthy pity. Get out of my room." I stared down at the matriarch of the Carter family. I felt no anger, no vengeance, and absolutely no pity. I simply felt an overwhelming sense of justice. I reached out and took the financial guarantor form from the doctor who had followed me into the room. I pulled a sleek silver pen from my clutch. Standing in the doorway, Marcus let out a loud, desperate gasp of relief. He believed I was weak. He genuinely believed that my basic human decency would override the decades of psychological torture they had inflicted upon me. He thought I was going to save them. I did not sign the VIP authorization line. I did not tear the paper up. I calmly moved my pen down the page and placed a bold, sharp checkmark in a completely different box. I signed my name with slow, deliberate precision and handed the clipboard back to the stunned hospital administrator. "I will not let you die, Vivian," I said, my voice perfectly level, projecting a chilling absolute authority. "You are going to live. You are going to survive this night, and you are going to live a very long life." Vivian's eyes narrowed in confusion, her chest heaving as she tried to process my words. "But you will not be recovering in a luxury suite?" I continued, stepping closer to the edge of her bed. "You will not be receiving $300,000 experimental designer drugs. I just transferred your primary medical coverage to the state basic health insurance plan. It is the exact same severely underfunded minimum coverage program that your beautiful charity forced its underprivileged employees to use while you were busy stealing millions to buy yourself diamonds in European spa retreats." Vivian's monitor began to beep faster as the horrific realization of my words washed over her. I turned my head and looked directly at the hospital administrator. "Transfer her," I ordered. "Move her to the general public ward immediately. Put her on the absolute most basic generic anti-rejection medication the state allows. Let her experience the exact same healthcare system she forced upon the poor working-class people she has spent her entire life despising." The administrator looked at the legally binding signed directive and immediately nodded to the medical orderlies standing by the door. They did not hesitate. The orderlies stepped forward and began systematically unplugging the luxury amenities. They disconnected the high-definition television, the private room cardiac monitors, and the premium comfort devices. With a loud mechanical clunk, they unlocked the wheels of her luxury bed. Vivian realized exactly what was happening. The sheer catastrophic horror of losing her privilege, of being stripped of her elite status and thrown into a crowded, noisy public hospital ward, hit her harder than any physical pain ever could. It was the ultimate, irreversible degradation. Her worst nightmare was becoming her permanent reality. "No!" Vivian shrieked, her voice tearing at her throat as the orderlies began rolling her bed toward the door. "Do not touch me. I am Vivian Carter. You cannot put me in a room with those people. Marcus, do something. Stop them right now." Her screams echoed down the sterile hallway, a frantic, desperate wail of a queen being dragged into the mud. The heavy doors of the public ward swung open, swallowing her cries, as she was pushed into a cramped, chaotic room filled with 6 other patients, the harsh fluorescent lights glaring down on her shattered dignity. Outside in the hallway, Marcus watched his mother being wheeled away into the general population. His mind finally snapped under the incomprehensible weight of his new reality. He had lost his company, his fortune, his brother, his fiancée, and now his mother's untouchable legacy. He let out a hollow, broken sound and collapsed entirely, sliding down the cold painted wall of the hospital corridor. He hit the linoleum floor, a ruined, destitute man sobbing uncontrollably in the shadows as I turned my back and walked away. The echoing sound of my footsteps in that sterile hospital corridor slowly faded completely, replaced by the quiet, energetic hum of a multi-billion-dollar tech enterprise. 6 months later, the world looked entirely different. The blinding fluorescent lights of the intensive care unit had been permanently traded for the warm golden sunlight flooding through the floor-to-ceiling windows of my new corner office. I stood behind a massive desk carved from solid black walnut, looking out over the sprawling Atlanta skyline. The city that had once felt like a cage designed by the Carter family was now my kingdom. I took a slow sip of my black coffee, allowing myself a fleeting thought about the men who used to believe they owned this city. Marcus Carter was currently wearing a standard-issue orange jumpsuit, serving a mandatory 5-year sentence at a medium-security federal correctional institution in Alabama. Without his bespoke velvet tuxedos, his offshore accounts, and his sycophantic enablers, he was just another nameless inmate. The prison doctors managed his kidney transplant with the absolute bare minimum standard of care legally required. They kept him alive, but the cheap generic medications left him in a perpetual state of chronic, exhausting nausea. He spent his days scrubbing cafeteria trays, a spectacular fall from grace for a man who used to dictate multi-million-dollar mergers over vintage champagne. His brother Brad fared significantly worse. The federal judge presiding over their case did not take kindly to a sworn officer of the court orchestrating a massive charity fraud ring. Stripped of his law license and permanently publicly disbarred, Brad was handed a devastating 12-year sentence in a maximum security facility. There were no plea deals available for the mastermind of the operation. The arrogant, untouchable lawyer who had smirked at me in the police precinct was now learning the harsh, brutal reality of the justice system he had spent his entire career manipulating. Maya had desperately tried to outrun the blast radius of her husband's destruction, but the IRS and the civil asset forfeiture teams were relentless. They meticulously seized her imported cars, her designer jewelry collections, and her hidden bank accounts to pay off the massive legal fees and federal fines Brad had accumulated. The woman who once spent her afternoons sipping mimosas at the exclusive country club, sneering at anyone she deemed beneath her social tier, was now working night shifts as a commercial cleaner. She spent her evenings pushing a heavy mop bucket and scrubbing the exact same corporate high-rises she used to look down upon, terrified of being recognized by her former high society peers. But the most profound and poetic justice belonged entirely to Vivian Carter. The grand, untouchable matriarch of Atlanta high society had been completely and permanently ostracized. When the state seized the sprawling Carter estate to pay back the stolen funds to the Vivian Carter Youth Foundation, she was evicted with nothing but a single suitcase. She now lived in a cramped, decaying one-bedroom apartment in a notorious, dilapidated neighborhood on the outskirts of the city. The basic generic anti-rejection medication the state provided barely kept her body from rejecting my kidney. She lived in constant, dull, agonizing pain entirely alone. Her former elite friends, the judges, the politicians, the socialites, had deleted her contact information the exact moment the FBI raided the engagement party. There were no more grand galas, no more imported silk wraps, and absolutely no more power. Just a sick, bitter old woman rotting away in a sweltering slum abandoned by the very society she had worshipped. Vivian Carter had tried to call me once. About 3 months into her miserable new life, she had somehow managed to borrow a phone and track down my private office line. When my assistant patched the call through, I listened to her raspy, desperate voice beg for financial assistance. She told me the neighborhood was dangerous, that she could not sleep because of the noise, that the cheap food was making her sick. I let her speak for 3 unbroken minutes, pouring out her misery. And then, without saying a single syllable in response, I gently placed the receiver back onto the cradle and permanently blocked the number. I owed her nothing. The universe had balanced its scales perfectly. I turned away from the window and walked back to my desk. The heavy leather chair felt like a throne. In the 6 months since the Carter Empire collapsed into ash, my life had accelerated at a breathtaking, unprecedented pace. Julian Vanguard had kept his word to the letter. He did not just provide me with legal protection and financial shelter, he provided me with an unlimited blank canvas to build my own legacy. With his massive initial venture capital investment, I launched my own independent cybersecurity firm. We specialized in building impenetrable proprietary defense networks for global financial institutions using the exact same aggressive architecture I had originally designed to monitor Brad and Marcus. The industry response was nothing short of explosive. Within 2 quarters, my firm had secured exclusive long-term contracts with 3 of the largest banking conglomerates in the world. Last week, Wall Street officially evaluated my company at over $1.2 billion. We had become a highly coveted tech unicorn in record time, and I was the sole founder and chief executive officer. My company was not just a business, it was a fortress. I employed a small army of the brightest, most ruthless ethical hackers on the planet. We did not just build firewalls, we hunted down vulnerabilities and obliterated them. I instituted a corporate culture built on absolute transparency and rigorous meritocracy, the exact opposite of the nepotistic, toxic swamp the Carters had run. Every single employee under my roof knew my story, and they respected the absolute hell out of me for it. I walked through the sleek, open-plan floors of my headquarters every morning, feeling a profound sense of ownership. Every line of code, every server rack, every brilliant mind working in this building was here because I had willed this company into existence through sheer force of anger and intellect. My face was on the cover of national business magazines. I was invited to speak at global tech summits in Tokyo, London, and New York. I was no longer the disgraced ex-wife of a private equity manager, desperately fighting to prove her innocence. I was Kiara, the absolute apex predator of the cybersecurity world, a recognized symbol of unyielding resilience and fierce independence. I had taken the worst betrayal imaginable, the physical and emotional theft of my own body, and weaponized it, turning my deep trauma into an untouchable empire. The heavy frosted glass door of my office swung open, interrupting my thoughts. Julian Vanguard walked in, looking as effortlessly lethal and imposing as ever in a tailored charcoal suit. He bypassed the guest chairs entirely and walked directly to my desk, dropping a thick, heavily encrypted dossier onto the polished wood. "Another hostile takeover?" I asked, leaning back in my chair and raising an eyebrow. Julian offered that signature sharp, anticipating smile, the look of a man who thrived on corporate warfare. "Only if you are ready to completely dismantle another corrupt syndicate," he replied, his gray eyes glinting with dark amusement. "Wall Street is genuinely terrified of you, Kiara. The executives check under their beds for you at night. They know that if your firm audits their systems, there is absolutely nowhere to hide their dirty money." I picked up the heavy dossier, feeling the satisfying weight of it in my hands. I traced my thumb over the confidential seal. I thought about the scared, desperate woman I had been just a year ago, bleeding out in a sterile hospital bed, while her husband handed her divorce papers. I thought about the freezing police precinct and the terror of being framed for a crime I did not commit. That woman was dead. She had been burned to ash in the fire of their betrayal and forged into something entirely unbreakable. I looked at Julian, the billionaire titan who had given me the sword to cut down my enemies, and realized we were no longer just allies. We were absolute equals ruling over a domain we had conquered together. "Let them be terrified," I said, returning his sharp, predatory smile. "We have a lot of work to do." The chaotic, sterile corridors of the hospital, the frantic boardrooms, and the flashing sirens of the federal raid all slowly fade into the background. The harsh, blinding glare of the past dissolves completely, replaced by the warm, golden light of the present. The camera slowly circles around me, capturing the quiet, absolute peace of my new reality. I am sitting comfortably on a plush velvet sofa in the center of my penthouse, overlooking the sprawling, vibrant skyline of the city I now conquer. I am wearing a sleek, tailored emerald suit, a subtle nod to the armor I wore on the night I finally dismantled my abusers. My posture is relaxed, but commanding. My eyes catch the fading sunlight, radiating a fierce, unshakable confidence that can only be earned by walking through hell and emerging entirely unscathed. I look down at my hands. They are perfectly manicured, calm, and steady. It feels like a lifetime ago that these same hands trembled as they clutched a black garbage bag filled with my meager belongings. It feels like a different universe where these hands signed away a vital organ to save a man who actively despised me. I used to look at my hands and wonder why they were never enough to hold on to the love I so desperately craved from the Carter family. Now I look at them and see the exact instruments that tore down a fraudulent dynasty and built a $1 billion cybersecurity empire from scratch. The media loves a good redemption story. They call me a tech unicorn. They write endless articles about my resilience, my aggressive corporate strategies, and my flawless partnership with Julian Vanguard. They plaster my face on the covers of financial magazines, calling me a symbol of modern female independence. But they only see the polished surface. They only see the victory lap. They do not see the grueling, agonizing nights spent doubting my own sanity. They do not see the sheer force of will it took to drag myself out of that hospital bed when every physical and emotional instinct screamed at me to surrender. For years, I allowed Vivian Carter to dictate my worth. I allowed Marcus to gaslight me into believing I was small, insignificant, and lucky to merely breathe the same air as his elite social circle. I bought into their toxic illusion. I believed that if I just worked harder, if I stayed quiet, if I proved my loyalty beyond a shadow of a doubt, they would eventually accept me. I fell for the greatest lie ever sold to the vulnerable. I believed that family was automatically defined by a legal marriage certificate, by shared addresses, and by forced proximity. I could not have been more completely and utterly wrong. Family is not about sharing a name or sharing blood. Family is about those who respect your sacrifices. It is about the people who stand fiercely by your side when the world turns dark, not the ones who actively push you into the shadows so they can shine brighter. Family does not demand that you diminish your own light to make them comfortable. True family, like the fiercely loyal corporate team I built around me and the unyielding partnership I found with Julian, celebrates your strength. They protect your vulnerabilities. They do not harvest your organs and then hand you divorce papers while you are still bleeding. I slowly traced the invisible line of my surgical scar hidden beneath the crisp fabric of my suit. I used to hate this scar. When I first looked at it in the hospital mirror, it felt like a permanent physical brand of my own foolishness. It felt like a brutal daily reminder that I had been played for a fool by a family of sociopaths. But time and success have a wonderful way of shifting your perspective. It no longer hurts. It no longer represents victimhood or gullibility. It represents survival. It is a battle wound from a war I decisively won. I once thought I had to cut out a piece of my own body to buy their acceptance. I genuinely believed that if I gave them my literal flesh and blood, if I sacrificed my own health and safety to keep their precious golden boy alive, they would finally see my value. I thought my kidney would be the ultimate undeniable proof of my devotion. But toxic people do not see sacrifice as love. They see it as a weakness to be endlessly exploited. They took my kidney without a single shred of gratitude and immediately disposed of me because they thought I had nothing left to offer. They vastly underestimated the core of my identity, but in the end I realized the only thing I needed to cut out was them. I excised the Carter family from my life with the precise cold calculation of a surgeon removing a malignant tumor. I did not mourn the loss of their toxic presence. I did not shed a single tear for the collapse of their fraudulent empire or the miserable lives they now lead. The moment they were gone, the moment I stopped trying to contort myself to fit into their twisted mold, my real life finally began. I stopped seeking validation from parasites and started demanding respect from the world. The transition from victim to victor is not a sudden magical leap. It is a daily grueling choice. It requires you to look at the people who broke you and decide that they do not get to write the ending to your story. Marcus, Brad, Vivian, and Maya thought they were the authors of my demise. They thought they could bury me under false accusations and stolen wealth. They did not realize that by throwing me into the dirt, they were simply planting a seed. I took their betrayal, their fraud, their arrogance, and their cruelty, and I used every single ounce of it as fuel. I burned their empire to the ground and built an impenetrable fortress right on top of their ashes. I leaned forward, resting my arms on my knees, looking directly into the camera lens. The golden hour light reflects in my eyes, highlighting the absolute clarity of my conviction. I am no longer a pawn in someone else's game. I am the architect of my own destiny. I no longer wait for someone to hand me a seat at the table because I own the entire building. If anyone tells you that you are not good enough, remember that their limitations do not define your potential. If they try to make you feel small, it is only because they are terrified of how massive you can become. You do not need to beg for love from people who are incapable of giving it. If anyone tells you that you are not good enough, remember this. A crown doesn't just appear. You have to forge it yourself from the ashes of those who betrayed you. Have you ever faced a toxic family like this? Comment below. Hit like, subscribe, and share this video if you believe karma always strikes at the right time. Goodbye.